The wind cut across Highgate Ranch with a kind of indifference only nature could afford, sweeping dust and memories in equal measure. Out here, time had its own pace. The wooden sign at the entrance, once bold with the Graves family name, hung crooked, the paint weathered by decades of sun and rain. The ranch was an old photograph, edges curling, colors fading, but stubbornly refusing to be thrown away. Elliot Graves stood on the porch, coffee cooling in his hand, eyes drifting across the paddock. He looked older than his 43 years, the lines on his face carved deep by grief and the relentless math of unpaid bills. In the silence of early morning, he heard only the creak of the windmill and occasionally a soft snort from the paddock, a reminder that not everything here had given up. There, circling the patchy grass, was Shadow. The colt looked nothing like the proud thoroughbreds from racing ads or glossy magazines. He was smaller, with coat black as a moonless night, his hind leg marked by a jagged scar that never let him forget the fire that nearly killed him as a foal. Shadow's gait was uneven. Every lap around the fence he seemed to fight his own body, his head tossing, his limp pronounced. Yet he ran, refusing the stillness like it was a personal insult. The neighbors used to stop by, but not so much anymore. This morning, a battered Ford pickup rolled to a stop on the gravel drive. Two men leaned against the hood, arms crossed, watching Shadow make another awkward pass. "Should have sold that one. Off with the rest," one called out, his words carried by the wind. Hell, I'd put the barn up before I'd waste feed on him." The other snickered, spitting tobacco into the dust. "Bet you a week's pay he can't run a straight line, let alone a race." Elliot didn't answer. He just stood quietly, watching the colt. In the hard light of morning, the ranch's problems pressed in on him. Debt notices in the kitchen drawer, the bank's warnings, the mortgage his father left behind like a curse. His brother Richard called twice a week now, always with the same message. "Sell, Elliot. There's nothing here but ghosts and dry fields." But something in Shadow's stubbornness echoed in Elliot. The world had decided both of them were broken, the horse, with his ruined leg and bad luck, the man, hollowed out by loss and the slow decay of hope. Maybe that was why Elliot felt drawn to Shadow, why he stood outside every dawn and watched that little colt refuse to give up. He leaned on the fence, mug pressed to his chest, and whispered, almost to himself, "You and me, we're the last damn fools here, huh?" As if hearing, Shadow slowed and looked up, ears flicking forward. For a moment their eyes met, man and horse, equally battered by the world. Elliot felt an unexpected surge of warmth, a quiet understanding. No one else saw it, but he did. Beneath the scars, a wild heart still beat. A door slammed behind him. June, his 10-year-old daughter, shuffled out, brown hair tangled, backpack dragging. "Dad, the bus'll be here soon, and Marcus says he's not going to school unless you drive him." Elliot smiled, ruffling her hair. "You know your brother's got more drama than a soap opera." June's face softened. "Are you coming to my recital tonight?" He hesitated, guilt pricking. "I'll try, honey. I promise." June gave him a look. She'd heard enough broken promises to know better. Then walked off, boots thumping on the porch. Elliot watched her go, the weight of all his failures heavier than ever. The kitchen was a mess of cereal bowls and bills. Marcus, 15, sat at the table, scowling at his phone. "Hey, bud, ready for practice?" "I quit." Marcus didn't look up. Elliot paused, caught off guard. "Football? You love it?" Marcus shrugged. "What's the point? You're never there anyway." The words stung. Elliot wanted to argue, to remind Marcus about everything he was trying to juggle. But the truth sat bitter on his tongue. Lately, all his energy went into keeping the ranch afloat, and Shadow alive. There wasn't much left for anything else. He drove them to the bus stop, the silence in the cab thick as the morning fog. When the kids were gone, he sat for a long while, engine idling, trying to remember when things had started to fall apart. After his father's funeral, maybe. Or after Sarah, his wife, the glue of their family, lost her fight with cancer 2 years ago. Since then, every day felt like he was fighting to keep from drowning. Back at the ranch, the phone rang. Richard's voice was clipped, impatient. "The bank's not waiting, El. We could get a good price for the land now, before you lose it all." Elliot stared out the window at Shadow, the little colt still limping, but running his heart out. "Not yet. There's something here I need to finish." Richard sighed. "You're going to drive us all into bankruptcy for that horse." Elliot hung up. Sometimes you just knew when you couldn't explain your reasons. The world measured value in dollars and cents, but Elliot saw it in heartbeats and second chances. He spent the rest of the morning repairing fences. Sweat stung his eyes, but his mind wandered to Shadow's future. Maybe, just maybe, there was something more for that colt, something the world hadn't seen yet. Racing? It sounded crazy, but he couldn't shake the idea. Later that afternoon, he called an old number from a crumpled business card. Marisol Vega. The rumors said she was a legend, an Olympic rider who walked away after a bad fall, now living in a trailer on the far side of the county. Elliot drove out, past dry fields and empty barns, feeling foolish and desperate. Marisol answered the door with a raised eyebrow, her hair streaked with gray, her posture proud but wary. "What do you want, Graves?" He hesitated. "I need help with the horse. He's not, like the others." She almost laughed. "No one ever is. Bring him by tonight. I'll see if he's worth the trouble." When he got back to the ranch, the sun was bleeding into the horizon. Elliot led Shadow into the trailer, nerves jangling. As the colt stepped into the arena, his limp obvious, Marisol's face softened for a moment. Under the moonlight, Shadow began to run. Not fast, but determined. Marisol watched, arms crossed, lips pressed tight. "You sure he's not part freight train?" she said at last. And for the first time in weeks, Elliot let himself hope. That night, alone in the barn, Elliot whispered to Shadow, "They said you were too broken. They say the same about me. Let's show them what they're missing." Outside, the wind kept blowing, but inside, for the first time in a long time, Elliot believed maybe, just maybe, they had a shot. The days grew shorter and the air sharper as autumn crept into the bones of Highgate Ranch. Elliot moved through his routines with a kind of desperate discipline, patching fences and feeding horses, trying to hold the world together with splinters and stubbornness. He heard the crunch of leaves, the distant bark of a neighbor's dog, and, more often than he cared to admit, the heavy silence of a house grown too quiet. Shadow, meanwhile, became both the heart and the question mark of the ranch. Each morning the colt greeted Elliot with pricked ears and expectant eyes, his limp a little less pronounced, his spirit undiminished. Some mornings, Elliot caught himself smiling as Shadow nuzzled his palm, the animal's warm breath a brief comfort. In those moments, Elliot almost believed they could change their luck. But the rest of the world wasn't so easily convinced. The debts remained, swelling like a storm on the horizon. The phone rang, a daily chorus of warnings and threats from the bank. The words foreclosure and repossession hung over the house like storm clouds. Richard called again, his tone sharper, more urgent. "You can't gamble everything on a crippled colt, El. There's still time to sell before the whole place goes under. Think about the kids, about what's left of Dad's legacy." Elliot stared at the kitchen counter, covered in bills, and felt the familiar ache of disappointment, not at Richard, but at himself. He wanted to shout, to argue, to make Richard understand that Highgate was more than acreage and barns. But what was there to say? The ranch felt less like a home and more like a ticking clock. One evening, as the sun bled crimson over the hills, Elliot stood by the paddock, watching Shadow canter awkwardly along the fence line. He heard gravel crunching behind him and turned to see a truck pull up. Not Richard's, but someone he hadn't expected. Sarah Price, the loan officer from the bank, stepped out, a leather folder tucked under her arm. "Evening, Mr. Graves," she said, her voice polite but businesslike. He nodded, bracing himself. "Evening, Miss Price." She glanced at Shadow, curiosity flickering in her eyes. Is this the famous cult I keep hearing about? Elliot bristled. Famous for what? Not winning any beauty contests, that's for sure. Sarah allowed herself a small smile. Some of the neighbors say he's a lost cause. Maybe, Elliot said quietly. But so were a lot of things around here. She opened her folder, papers rustling in the breeze. You know why I'm here. The bank needs an answer, Elliot. You've got until the end of the month to come current. After that, it's out of my hands. He studied the ground. I have a plan. She raised an eyebrow. Does it involve more horses? He didn't answer directly. Just give me a little time. Sarah closed her folder. You've always been stubborn. I hope, for your sake, that it pays off. And she left, her words lingering long after her truck disappeared into the dusk. Elliot turned back to Shadow, a sense of urgency gnawing at him. The bank was closing in, and his brother's patience was running thin. If he didn't act soon, Highgate would slip through his fingers. That night, Elliot sat at the kitchen table with a bottle of whiskey and a battered laptop. He scrolled through pages of racing events, prize purses, and entry fees. The numbers made him dizzy. But one thing was clear. Racing was the only shot they had left. If Shadow could win, maybe, just maybe, he could pay off enough of the debt to keep the ranch. But no one raced a horse like Shadow. The idea sounded insane, even to him. Still, something in the colt's eyes whispered possibility. A stubborn refusal to accept what others decided. He knew he needed help. That's why, the next morning, he loaded Shadow into the old trailer and drove out to Marisol Vega's property. The drive was long and silent. Marcus and June already at school. The only company the rhythmic thumping of Shadow's hooves against the floorboards. Marisol's place was nothing like Highgate. Smaller, tidier, with a sense of calm that felt almost foreign. She stood by the fence, arms crossed, watching as Elliot led Shadow into her arena. The colt shied at the unfamiliar scents and sounds, his ears twitching, his muscles tensed. Marisol circled the colt, her eyes sharp, missing nothing. You know he's not built like a racehorse, right? Too short, too stocky. And that limp. You're dreaming, Graves. Elliot braced himself. I'm not asking for a miracle. Just a chance. She snorted, but there was a glint of amusement in her gaze. I walked away from miracles years ago. But, let's see what he's got. She asked Elliot to let Shadow loose in the ring. The colt hesitated, then broke into a canter. His limp pronounced at first, but less so as he warmed up. Marisol watched in silence, her eyes narrowing as Shadow found his rhythm. Under the soft light of the morning sun, there was a wildness in his movements, a kind of raw, unrefined power. Not bad, she murmured, almost to herself. Elliot caught it, hope sparking in his chest. Can you help us? Marisol sighed. I'll try. But you have to understand, this isn't about pushing harder. If you push him, he'll break. You need to earn his trust. No shortcuts. Elliot nodded, relief flooding through him. Whatever it takes. Over the next few days, Marisol introduced Shadow to a new world of training. Gone were the harsh commands and quick fixes. Instead, she used groundwork, soft words, and patience. She fed him by hand, taught him to respond to gentle pressure, and waited for him to trust her. It wasn't easy. Shadow resisted, bucked, even knocked Marisol to the ground once, his eyes wide with fear. Elliot rushed to help, but Marisol waved him off, dusting herself off with a grin. He's got spirit. That's good. Means he hasn't given up yet. Elliot felt a surge of gratitude. For the first time in months, someone believed in Shadow, or almost as much as he did. Meanwhile, life at Highgate grew more tense. June missed her mother more than ever, clinging to old photos and asking questions Elliot couldn't answer. Marcus grew sullen, withdrawing into himself, skipping practice and avoiding his father's gaze. The ranch felt heavy with things unsaid. One evening, as Elliot scrubbed mud from Shadow's coat, June came to him with a drawing. A stick figure family, a black horse at the center. She pointed to the smallest figure. That's Mom. She's still watching us. She wants you to be happy, Dad. Elliot swallowed hard, tears burning his eyes. Thanks, sweetheart. I think Shadow's helping too. June smiled, hugging him tightly. Don't let anyone say he's not good enough. That night, Elliot stood by the paddock, watching Shadow run under the stars. The colt moved with a new confidence, the limp almost gone in the soft grass. For a moment, Elliot allowed himself to hope, to believe that against all odds they could pull off something extraordinary. And somewhere, in the quiet dark, he made a silent promise. No matter what happened, he wouldn't give up on Shadow, or on himself. The early fall mornings at Highgate Ranch always arrived with a haze, the sun reluctant to burn off the mist that clung to the fields. It was a time of day when the world felt quiet enough to dream again, and Elliot leaned into those hours with renewed purpose. The decision had been made. Shadow would race. But nothing about their journey was going to be easy or typical, not for a scarred colt with a limp, or a man whose heart felt stitched together with regret. Training started before dawn, the dew still glistening on the grass, the cold biting at Elliot's fingers. Marisol arrived each day in her battered red truck, boots muddy, face weathered, her eyes always scanning, judging, calculating. She wasted no time with pleasantries. We start with groundwork, she declared the first morning, leading Shadow into the training paddock. The colt eyed her warily, muscles tensed, ready to bolt at any sudden move. Elliot stood by the fence, his nerves raw. He wanted so much for Shadow to succeed, but feared every misstep. Marisol worked with practiced calm, her voice low, her movements deliberate. She didn't try to force Shadow. She waited for him to come to her. It took nearly an hour for the colt to relax, to accept the gentle touch of her hand on his neck. Patience, Marisol said, without looking at Elliot. Trust is built in inches, not miles. The next days were a test of wills. Shadow balked at new tasks, his eyes flicking from Marisol to Elliot, searching for an escape. He reared up at the sound of the long whip cracking in the dirt. But Marisol never raised her voice, never punished. Instead, she used a soft rope halter, working with subtle cues and endless repetition. Elliot watched, learning as much as Shadow, amazed at the dance unfolding between horse and human. But progress was far from linear. On the fourth day, Shadow threw Marisol for the first time. The colt had been asked to move sideways along the fence, a simple maneuver for most, but for Shadow, it triggered old fear. With a sudden lurch, he twisted and bucked, sending Marisol sprawling into the dust. Elliot rushed forward, heart pounding. "Are you okay?" Marisol sat up, grinning through the dirt smeared across her cheek. If I got paid for every time a horse threw me, I'd own Kentucky by now. But Elliot saw the tension in her jaw as she stood, the pain she hid behind bravado. Maybe this is too much, he muttered, doubt seeping in. Maybe he's not ready. She cut him off. You want him to trust you, but you don't trust yourself. Horses know. You have to believe, or he never will. Her words struck deeper than he wanted to admit. That night, Elliot couldn't sleep. He wandered the house, his footsteps echoing in empty rooms. In June's bedroom, he found her asleep, clutching a well-worn stuffed animal and one of her mother's old scarves. In Marcus's room, the glow of a hidden phone screen lit up his son's sleeping face. Elliot's chest tightened. He was fighting so hard for the ranch, for Shadow. But the people who needed him most felt further away than ever. By dawn, Elliot had made up his mind. He wouldn't ask Marisol to return until he could prove to himself and to Shadow that he believed in this journey, no matter how impossible it seemed. He spent the morning with Shadow, alone, talking to the colt as if he could answer. He told him about the old days, about Sarah, about the fear that had gripped him since she died. Shadow listened, his ears flicking, eyes softening with something that looked like understanding. When Marisol arrived, Elliot greeted her differently. Let's try again, but this time, I want to help. She nodded. You'll start with groundwork? No saddle, no bridle? Just you, the rope, and him. Elliot's hands shook as he took the rope, but Marisol guided him through each step, circling, backing up, approaching, retreating. It was awkward at first, Shadow testing every boundary, every ounce of Elliot's resolve. But when Elliot stopped anticipating failure, when he moved with quiet confidence, something changed. The colt's muscles relaxed, his eyes lost that wild edge. For the first time, Shadow willingly followed Elliot's lead. Marisol smiled, pride flickering across her face. See? He wants to trust you. Don't let him down. Over the next week, training became a ritual. Elliot woke before sunrise, helped June with her breakfast, left notes for Marcus, and then spent the morning in the paddock. He worked beside Marisol, learning to communicate through movement and intention, not force. Shadow responded. The colt's limp lessened as his confidence grew. He trotted with his head high, mane tossing, eyes shining with the hint of pride. He allowed Marisol to touch his scar, no longer flinching at every contact. They added new exercises, walking over poles, weaving between cones, trotting in tight circles. Each small victory felt monumental. On one afternoon, Marcus wandered out to the paddock, football tucked under his arm. He watched silently as Elliot guided Shadow through a series of turns. "He's not so broken, huh?" Marcus said, voice softer than usual. Elliot smiled. "Neither are we." Marcus snorted, but his lips twitched in a reluctant smile. "You think he'll win?" Elliot looked at Shadow, then at his son. "I think he's already winning. And so are we, just for trying." As to that night, the family sat together for dinner for the first time in weeks. The food was simple, conversation halting, but it was something. June chattered about school. Marcus even laughed at one of her jokes. Elliot soaked it in, feeling hope rising in his chest like the dawn. The week ended with a test. Marisol saddled Shadow, heart in her throat. Elliot stood by, anxiety and pride wrestling inside him. With a gentle word, Marisol mounted. Shadow trembled, tense but trusting. She urged him forward, and the colt moved. Hesitant at first, then with growing confidence. They circled the paddock, a partnership born of patience and second chances. By the end, Marisol slid from the saddle, tears shining in her eyes. "He's ready," she whispered, "and so are you." Elliot hugged Shadow, burying his face in the colt's mane. For the first time in a long while, he felt whole. Trust, built in inches, had brought them all further than fear ever could. Outside, the sun broke through the clouds, painting the ranch in gold. For a fleeting moment, everything felt possible. The announcement of the local derby sent a ripple of energy through Highgate Ranch. It wasn't the Kentucky Derby, nothing nearly so grand, but for Elliot, it might as well have been. It was their chance to step out from the shadows, to show the world, in themselves, what they'd become. The weeks of training with Marisol had transformed not just Shadow, but the entire Graves family. Yet, as the Derby day approached, old doubts began to creep back in, clinging to Elliot like morning fog. Marcus found Elliot in the barn, tightening Shadow's new bridle. The boy shifted from foot to foot, trying to sound casual, but betraying a nervous energy. "So, you're really entering him, huh?" Elliot looked up, wiping sweat from his brow. "We are, son. You coming to watch?" Marcus shrugged, his gaze lingering on Shadow. "Don't embarrass us, okay?" But the corner of his mouth twitched, betraying pride behind the bravado. Even June, normally so focused on her own little world, asked to wear her lucky blue dress for the occasion. She'd drawn a big sign in bright markers. "Go, Shadow! Go, Dad!" It now hung crookedly by the paddock, fluttering in the wind. The morning of the race, Elliot rose before dawn, nerves twisting in his stomach. He found Marisol already in the barn, checking Shadow's legs for swelling, running her hands along the old scar with gentle precision. "He's ready," she said, voice steady. "But remember, it's just another day for him. Don't let your nerves spook him." Elliot nodded, fighting the anxiety that threatened to swallow him. He dressed Shadow in his best gear, the old leather saddle cleaned and polished, a new number pinned to the bridle. The little colt looked proud, standing taller than usual, head up, eyes wide, and alert. Elliot felt a surge of affection for the horse, for all they'd survived to get here. The county fairgrounds buzzed with energy. Trucks and trailers crowded the parking lot. Other riders, all in crisp uniforms and high-dollar boots, eyed Shadow with skepticism and, in some cases, outright pity. Elliot could hear the snickers and muttered comments as he led Shadow to the warm-up area. "That's the one with the limp, right? Heard he can barely trot. Why even bother?" Elliot ignored them, focusing on Shadow's breathing and keeping his own nerves in check. But it stung hearing strangers dismiss their hard work and the hope he'd nursed so carefully. Shadow nuzzled his arm, as if sensing the tension, and Elliot gave him a reassuring scratch behind the ear. Marisol met them at the starting gate, eyes narrowed, jaw set. "Don't listen to the noise," she said. "You and Shadow have already come further than anyone thought. Whatever happens out there, you hold your head high." Elliot swallowed hard and nodded. As he guided Shadow into position, June and Marcus cheered from the bleachers, their voices loud and bright above the crowd. For a moment, Elliot felt invincible. The starter raised the flag, hearts pounded, hooves pawed at the earth, and then they were off. A Shadow stumbled out of the gate, his limp apparent for the first few strides, and Elliot's heart sank. But just as quickly, the colt found his rhythm, legs churning, head stretching forward. Elliot leaned into the movement, guiding him around the first bend. Horses thundered past, some already pulling ahead, but Shadow didn't quit. He pushed on, his will stronger than his stride. By the halfway mark, they were mid-pack. Elliot could hear jeers from the sidelines. "Pretty pony, wrong race." Elliot gritted his teeth. "Don't listen, boy," he whispered. "We're not done yet." Coming into the final turn, something clicked. Shadow surged forward, his limp momentarily forgotten, overtaking two horses and nearly catching a third. The crowd erupted, surprised by the sudden burst. Elliot urged him on, feeling the colt's heart pounding in time with his own. They crossed the finish line in third place, not first, not last. But for Elliot, it felt like a victory. He slid from the saddle, breathless, as June and Marcus ran to greet him, their faces alight with excitement. You did it," June squealed, hugging Shadow's neck. Marcus punched Elliot lightly in the shoulder, his grin wide and genuine. Marisol approached, her eyes shining. "You both surprised them. More important, you surprised yourselves." But not everyone was celebrating. As Elliot led Shadow back to the trailer, he spotted Richard leaning against the fence, arms folded, expression dark. "That was reckless," Richard snapped when Elliot approached. "You're risking everything on a horse that will never win. If you keep this up, you'll lose the ranch, Dad's legacy, everything." Elliot's jaw tightened. "Let me lose it doing something I believe in, Rich. I'd rather fail on my own terms than quit on a dream." Richard shook his head, frustration and fear warring on his face. "Dreams don't pay bills, El. And you've got kids to think about." As Richard stalked away, Elliot's confidence faltered. The sting of his brother's words hung in the air. He glanced at his children, now petting Shadow and laughing, oblivious to the storm brewing around them. That night, the family returned home, exhausted. June fell asleep in the truck, clutching her homemade sign. Marcus slumped in the back, earbuds in, a small smile lingering as he replayed the day's excitement in his mind. Elliot stayed up late, staring at the kitchen table piled with unpaid bills. He thought about what Richard said, about the risks he was taking, but every time doubt crept in, he remembered the feeling of crossing that finish line, the pride in his kids' eyes, the weight of Shadow's trust. He found Marisol in the barn, brushing Shadow's coat by lantern light. "You really think we have a shot?" he asked quietly. She looked at him, face serious. "I think you have more than a shot. But you have to want it enough to fight for it, no matter who doubts you. That includes yourself." Elliot nodded, her words sinking deep. For the first time since Sarah died, he felt like he was moving forward, not just surviving, but living. He knelt beside Shadow, pressing his forehead to the colt's. "Thank you," he whispered, voice thick with emotion, "for not giving up on me." In the quiet barn, surrounded by the smell of hay and hope, Elliot understood. This was only the beginning. The world could laugh, his brother could scorn, But as long as he believed in Shadow and himself, they still had everything to race for. The days after the Derby were charged with a new kind of energy at Highgate Ranch. Word of Shadow's surprising third-place finish rippled through the county, stirring curiosity and disbelief in equal measure. Neighbors who once smirked now slowed their trucks near the pasture, watching the black colt with something close to respect. For the first time in years, hope felt like more than just a word in Elliot's vocabulary. It felt alive, running wild through the grass, impossible to pin down. Still, for every hopeful glance, there were doubters in the shadows. The racing world ran on bloodlines and old money, not on heart or second chances. Yet, as the local paper ran a story titled "Dark Horse Surprises at County Derby," Elliot noticed something changing. People started asking questions about the colt's story, about the man who refused to give up, about the ranch that everyone thought was finished. But it wasn't just strangers taking notice. Elliot's phone rang off the hook. Local investors, feed companies, even a slick-talking man from a regional racing syndicate wanted to know more about Shadow. The offers ranged from small sponsorships to full-blown buyouts. Contracts landed on Elliot's kitchen table, some with numbers big enough to pay off all his debts and then some. Marisol found him one evening, standing over a stack of papers, brow furrowed, hands trembling with indecision. "What's the matter?" she asked, her voice soft but steady. "They're offering enough to save the ranch," Elliot said, voice tight. "If I sell Shadow now, all of this," he gestured to the walls, the bills, the battered family photos, "it's over. No more fighting." Marisol picked up one of the glossy contracts, scanning the fine print. "But if you sell him, it's not your story anymore. It's theirs." Elliot let out a breath he didn't know he was holding. "Am I being a fool?" She shook her head. "A fool is someone who gives up on what matters most for what matters now. Only you can decide what that is." Later that night, he took a walk through the pastures, the sky ink black and spattered with stars. Shadow grazed quietly in the moonlight, his coat shimmering, his limp barely noticeable now. Elliot leaned on the fence, watching the colt and weighing his choices. Money could fix a lot, but it couldn't rewrite regret or buy back pride. He made his decision just as the first light crept over the horizon. No amount of money was worth the chance Shadow had given him. A chance at redemption, at faith, at belonging. He'd fight for the ranch the only way he knew how. By trusting the heart of the horse everyone else had counted out. The next morning, Elliot called every investor, sponsor, and syndicate. He thanked them, politely but firmly refusing every offer. The relief in his voice surprised even him. When he told Marisol, she only nodded, a rare smile breaking through her usual stoicism. The family felt the impact almost immediately. With no windfall to solve their problems, the pressure returned. Bills went unpaid. Elliot's brother Richard started calling again, more frantic than before. But there was a change at home that money couldn't buy. A sense of unity that came from shared struggle. Elliot was present at breakfast, helping June with her homework, talking with Marcus about school, even showing up for one of Marcus's football practices. It wasn't perfect. The weight of responsibility pressed harder than ever. Marcus quit football for good. Frustrated that his father couldn't promise him a future beyond the ranch. Aunt June became quieter, missing more dance recitals, sensing the tension that no one could quite name. One evening, after a particularly tense dinner, June confronted her father in the hallway. "We lost Mom, Dad. Now we're losing you to a horse." The words cut deep. Elliot crouched down, meeting his daughter's tear-filled gaze. "Honey, I'm trying to keep us together. Shadow's given me a reason to fight again." June's voice was barely a whisper. "I just want you to see me, too." The next morning, Elliot found Marcus sitting by Shadow's fence, kicking at the dirt, face set in a hard scowl. "You trust that horse. But you don't trust us at Nydia," Marcus muttered, not meeting his father's eyes. Elliot sat beside him in the dew-soaked grass, silence stretching between them. Uh, I'm sorry, Marcus. I've been so afraid of losing this place. I didn't see how close I was to losing you and your sister. That ends now. I promise. I'll do better, starting today. They sat in the quiet for a long time, listening to Shadow's soft huffs and the distant call of a mourning dove. It wasn't a perfect reconciliation, but something shifted. A small, fragile bridge building itself across the gulf of grief and misunderstanding. Despite the turmoil at home, Shadow's progress in training was undeniable. Marisol pushed them harder now, raising the stakes with every practice. Shadow responded, growing faster, stronger, more confident. He leapt hurdles, responded to subtle cues, and even began to enjoy the attention of the small crowds that gathered to watch his sessions. The next local race was a higher stakes event, drawing more attention and more competitors. The paddocks were filled with horses bred for speed and grace, their handlers casting wary, sometimes dismissive glances at Shadow and Elliot. Marisol stood by, arms folded, a silent guardian. The race was tense from the start. Shadow started in the middle of the pack, jostled by larger, more aggressive horses. Elliot fought to keep his cool, breathing in time with Shadow's strides. As they rounded the final turn, a sudden gap opened. Elliot saw it, just a sliver, but enough. He urged Shadow forward, feeling the colt surge beneath him with a power that defied logic, lineage, and every expert's expectation. They crossed the finish line first. For a moment the world went silent. Then cheers erupted, disbelief morphing into celebration. Marisol whooped from the sidelines, June and Marcus rushed the track, and even a few local skeptics tipped their hats. But as soon as the race ended, the offers came flooding back. Bigger, faster, and more insistent than before. Press reporters asked for interviews. A regional sports channel wanted to feature Shadow's story. Contracts arrived by courier, promising luxury, fame, and security. Elliot refused them all. "He's not for sale," he told everyone. "We're not finished writing our story." At home, the tension didn't vanish. Marcus still questioned the future. June still mourned her mom in quiet ways, but something new bloomed in the family. Respect. They saw in Elliot not just the desperate man clinging to a dying ranch, but a father who fought for what he believed in, even when it cost him. Late that night, as rain tapped gently against the roof, Elliot sat at the kitchen table with Marisol, exhaustion and relief mingling in his chest. "Why do you keep saying no to them?" Marisol asked quietly. Elliot looked at the ceiling, eyes shining with emotion. "Because winning is good, but believing is better. Shadow believed in me before anyone else did. I can't sell that, not for any price." Outside, Shadow nickered softly in his stall, content, and inside, for the first time in years, Elliot felt like a man who belonged exactly where he was. The days after Shadow's first real victory shimmered with a kind of nervous energy at Highgate Ranch. The world outside seemed to believe in them now, at least for a moment. But inside the house, belief was far more complicated. The bills didn't slow down. The phone calls from the bank grew more urgent, more threatening. The tension crackled, invisible but everywhere, like the hint of a coming storm in the dry heat of August. Elliot tried to keep up, running between training, family, and never-ending chores. He fixed fences, balanced ledgers, and patched leaks in the old barn roof, feeling each day stretch thinner than the last. Marisol noticed the strain, but she was tough, never coddling, only occasionally letting slip a look of concern when Elliot's hands shook as he saddled Shadow, or when he forgot simple things, like picking up feed or returning calls. Shadow's presence was both anchor and trigger. The colt flourished in training, each session more impressive than the last, but his success only magnified the choices pressing in on Elliot. Should he chase bigger races, try to risk it all for the shot at a championship, or focus on simply holding the ranch together? The decision seemed impossible, the stakes too high. The pressure at home was no less intense. After dinner one night, Elliot sat with June at the worn kitchen table, her fingers twisting nervously in the fringe of her blanket. "Dad, are you really going to miss my recital again?" Her voice was small, fragile. He hesitated, his mind racing through all the things that demanded his attention. Shadow's early morning workouts, the meetings with Marisol, the mounting bills. "I'll try, June," he said softly. "I really will." She just nodded, a sad understanding settling in her eyes. "It's okay. I know you have to take care of Shadow. But sometimes I wish things were like before, when you and Mom came to everything." Elliot's throat tightened. He reached across the table, but June pulled her hands into her lap. "I just miss you, Dad." The next day, Marcus cornered him in the barn, his face tight with frustration. "Coach called," he said flatly. "Asked why I haven't shown up in weeks. You know, before all this started, I actually liked football, but now I don't know." Elliot closed his eyes, exhaustion throbbing behind them. "Marcus, I never meant for you to give up what you love." Marcus kicked at the dirt, jaw clenched. "You think I care about football?" "I just wanted you to care about something besides the ranch, besides the horse. But you're never around, Dad. Not for us." The words landed hard like a punch to the gut. Elliot wanted to explain, to tell Marcus that he was fighting for all of them, for the family's future, for the ranch, for hope. But every explanation sounded hollow. The reality was undeniable. He lost track of the balance, and the kids were slipping away. The guilt stayed with him, gnawing as he threw himself into work. He tried to reconnect, planned a family dinner at the town's only diner, promised June he'd be at her next recital, asked Marcus about school, but every attempt seemed to backfire. The dinner was canceled when Shadow threw a shoe and needed emergency care. The recital was missed when the bank demanded an urgent meeting. The promises broke, one by one, and with each broken promise, the gap between Elliot and his children widened. One especially raw evening, Marcus vanished without a word. Elliot called for him, but there was no answer. Panic rising, he checked every room in the house, then sprinted out to the barn, heart pounding. He found Marcus at last, sitting on the cold ground by Shadow's fence, knees drawn to his chest. "Marcus, you scared me," Elliot said, breathless. Marcus didn't look at him. "Did you ever think about what we need, Dad? Or is it just about the ranch and Shadow?" Elliot crouched beside him, unsure of what to say. The silence between them stretched, punctuated only by Shadow's quiet huffs as the colt watched from the paddock. Marcus's voice was raw, barely more than a whisper. "You trust that horse, but you don't trust us to need you. It's like, since Mom died, we all disappeared." Elliot felt his composure cracking. He reached out, placing a tentative hand on Marcus's shoulder. "You're right. I've been lost, Marcus. Losing your mom, it broke me. Oh, I thought saving the ranch would fix it, would keep us together, but I see now I've just made you and June feel alone." Marcus didn't pull away, but he didn't look up either. "I just want my dad back." Elliot nodded, tears stinging his eyes. "I'll do better. I promise. Starting now." The two sat in silence, the weight of grief and forgiveness settling around them. Above, the sky was wide and black, stars glimmering like distant hopes. After that night, Elliot made changes, small at first. He scheduled Shadow's training for earlier mornings to leave evenings free for family. He showed up to June's next recital, standing in the back with mud on his boots and pride swelling in his chest as she danced her heart out. He started helping Marcus with homework, even when all he wanted was sleep. Still, the challenges didn't disappear. The bank's warnings grew louder, deadlines looming. Richard's calls were near daily, each one more desperate and angry. "You're running out of time, Elliot. Sell now, before it's too late." But Elliot held firm. Shadow was more than a racehorse. He was a second chance. Elliot couldn't bear to let go. Not now, not after all they'd built together. One night, as he mucked stalls and listened to the rain battering the barn roof, Marisol joined him, wordless. They worked side by side, the quiet of comfort. After a while, she spoke. "You can't fix everything, Elliot, but you're fixing something. Sometimes that's enough." He nodded, grateful. I just want to do right by everyone." She smiled, rare and sincere. "You're learning. That's what matters." Late that evening, Elliot sat by Shadow's stall, the colt dozing quietly, the house lights glowing softly in the distance. The fractures in his life were still there, but he could feel the old wounds beginning to heal ever so slightly. He realized then that the fences he spent so much time mending weren't just in the fields, they were in his heart, in his family, in the spaces left behind by loss. In every small effort, every gesture of trust was a nail, a plank, a thread in the slow repair of everything broken. Elliot closed his eyes, listening to the gentle rhythm of Shadow's breath, and made a silent vow. He would fight for his children as fiercely as he fought for the ranch. He would be there. Not just as a rancher, not just as a dreamer, but as their father. And as dawn broke, soft and gold over Highgate Ranch, the fences, literal and invisible, held strong for one more day. Winter faded reluctantly, the thaw slow and muddy, but as the land awakened, so did hope at Highgate Ranch. For the first time in a long time, laughter and purpose threaded their way through the old farmhouse. Elliot found himself making breakfast for the kids before sunrise, working alongside Marisol in the cold dawns, and staying up late to balance ledgers and fill out race entry forms. Through the endless chores and lingering debts, he finally felt, if not at peace, at least on the right path. Shadow's growing reputation opened doors none of them had ever dared dream about. After his last victory, invitations began arriving for races out of state, each one a step closer to the big leagues. It was Marisol who delivered the most electrifying news. "He's qualified, Elliot. He can run the Kentucky Derby." The words hung in the barn, almost too big to fit inside the space. Elliot stared at her, the weight of possibility pressing against his chest. The Kentucky Derby, the race his father once called the heart of American horse racing, the dream every small-town rancher held close and every outsider dismissed as impossible. Elliot's hands shook as he stroked Shadow's muzzle. "Do you really think he's ready?" Marisol smiled, her eyes warm for the first time in days. "He's more than ready. The question is, are you?" The news sent shockwaves through the ranch and beyond. As local news stations called for interviews, and a regional racing magazine sent a photographer to snap pictures of Shadow galloping against the frosty sunrise. Neighbors who'd once mocked Elliot now stopped him at the diner, shaking his hand, telling him how proud his father would be. Even Richard called, his voice softer than before. "If anyone could pull this off, it's you, El. Don't forget, whatever happens, you've still got a family here." Yet for all the encouragement, the closer the Derby loomed, the greater the pressure became. Elliot could feel it everywhere, in the urgent calls from sponsors, the stack of bills growing higher on his desk, the silent, hopeful looks from Marcus and June each morning. And there was the other worry. The one Elliot hardly dared name. It was Marisol who finally voiced it after one of Shadow's strongest training runs. As she unsaddled him, she ran a practiced hand along his hind leg and frowned. "He's running well, but there's heat in his tendon. It's slight. Might just be from working harder than usual, but I want the vet to check him before we go any further." Elliot's gut twisted. "How bad is it?" Marisol met his eyes. "I don't know yet, but you need to prepare yourself for the possibility. Racing is brutal. Even a small injury at this level could mean the end of his career." The vet, Dr. Kim, came the next day. A quiet, thorough woman with kind eyes and a no-nonsense manner. She examined Shadow, her hands gentle but searching, her brow furrowed in concentration. After a long silence, she stood and gave her verdict. "It's a minor strain, Elliot. Not a tear. He can run, but you have to understand, after a race at that intensity, he may never run again. There's risk. If you want him to race, you have to accept that this could be his last." Elliot stood in the stall, the old familiar ache of hard choices pressing down on him. Shadow nuzzled his shoulder, sensing the tension. That night, after dinner, Elliot sat at the kitchen table surrounded by silence. He stared at the family photo on the wall, Sarah's gentle smile seeming to offer comfort from another world. He remembered what she used to say about second chances. You only get them if you're brave enough to let go of the past. Marcus wandered in, holding his phone, uncertainty in his eyes. Dad, if Shadow can't run again, does that mean it's all over? Elliot swallowed, searching for the truth. No, son. It means we make a choice. We do what's right for him, no matter what it costs. June appeared in the doorway, her face small and worried. He doesn't have to win, Dad. Just don't let him get hurt. Elliot pulled them both close, feeling the love and fear and hope all tangled together. I won't let anything happen to him. Not if I can help it. The pressure from outside was relentless. Sponsors called, some offering to pay for Shadow's medical care, others dangling bonuses and endorsement deals if he ran. It's the chance of a lifetime, one said. Shadow could be a legend. Don't let sentimentality get in the way of greatness. But for Elliot, the decision was anything but simple. He spent sleepless nights in the barn, watching Shadow sleep, listening to the horses' soft breathing and remembering every moment of their journey. Marisol found him there one dawn, exhaustion etched deep on his face. I don't want to lose him, Elliot confessed, voice cracking. Not for money, not for glory. Marisol sat beside him, her voice gentle. You won't lose him, but you need to decide, are you doing this for him or for you? He looked at Shadow, the colt's dark eyes shining in the half-light. I started for me, for the ranch. Now, I don't know. Maybe I'm just afraid to let go. She nodded. If you run him like a machine, I walk. But if you trust him, trust yourself, no matter what happens, you'll both come out whole. Elliot finally understood. The real risk wasn't losing the race, or the money, or even the ranch. It was losing the trust that had been built in scars and second chances. It was losing the heart at the center of everything. Derby Day arrived cold and bright, the sky a perfect blue. The family piled into the truck, Marcus and June dressed in borrowed jackets, Marisol in her lucky hat. The tension was palpable, but so was the hope. As they unloaded Shadow at the stables, crowds gathered, some drawn by the underdog story, others just curious to see if a horse with a limp could really make it this far. Reporters hovered, snapping photos and asking questions. Elliot ignored them all, focusing on Shadow, brushing his coat until it gleamed, whispering promises only the colt could hear. In the stables, Dr. Kim approached with a final check. He's strong. He wants to run. But remember what we talked about? Elliot nodded, heart pounding. In his mind, he replayed every step of their journey. The silent mornings, the failures, the stubborn hope. He looked at his children, at Marisol, at the sea of strangers waiting to witness their moment. He realized then that the real victory wasn't in crossing the finish line first. It was in having the courage to show up at all. As the call to the starting gate echoed through the paddock, Elliot hugged Marcus and June, his hands steady for the first time in months. No matter what happens, we did this together. He walked Shadow toward the gate, Marisol by his side. She squeezed his hand. Trust him. Trust yourself. Let the rest go. Elliot nodded, and as he led Shadow into the sunlight, the roar of the crowd faded to a distant hum. For the first time, he wasn't thinking about the ranch, the debt, or the doubters. He was thinking about heart and trust and the second chance they'd both been given. The Derby was about to begin. And so was the next test, not just of speed or strength, but of loyalty, belief, and the kind of courage that comes from loving something more than yourself. The morning of the Kentucky Derby broke with the buzz of anticipation thick in the air, even at Highgate Ranch. For Elliot, it felt like waking up in the eye of a hurricane. He barely slept, his nerves wound tight, mind replaying every choice and sacrifice that led to this day. All the world's noise, the creditors, the doubters, even Richard's latest anxious voicemail, faded behind the moment's significance. At the track, the scene was a swirl of color and sound. Reporters buzzed around the stables, TV cameras tracking every movement, horses gleamed in the sunlight, grooms hustling, trainers barking instructions, the smell of earth, hay, and the electric tang of hope mixed with the crowd's rising energy. Shadow shifted restlessly in his stall, ears flicking, eyes wide with alertness. Elliot's hand on his neck was steady, but his own heart rattled in his chest. Marcus and June tried to keep up a brave front, but the nerves were visible in their fidgeting, the way they stuck close to Marisol, who stood with her usual calm, face unreadable beneath her wide-brimmed hat. "Remember," she said to Elliot, "he trusts you. Don't let anyone else's doubts matter today." The paddock was chaos, a whirl of photographers, brightly dressed owners, and horses bred for nothing but speed and prestige. Shadow stood out, smaller, scarred, still favoring his right hind leg in tense moments. A few bystanders snickered. "That's the one with the limp? What's he doing here?" But some, recognizing the determination in both horse and handler, just nodded, quietly rooting for the underdog. The jockeys climbed into their silks, each team's colors flying like battle flags. Elliot, hands shaking, helped adjust Shadow's bridle and whispered, "You just run your race, buddy. Win or lose, we did this together." As the riders were called to the post, Marisol caught Elliot's arm. "No matter what happens, you change the story. For him, for you, for all of us." Elliot squeezed her hand, then lifted Marcus and June into a tight embrace. "Whatever happens next, I love you, both of you. Thank you for believing in me, even when I didn't." The horses paraded past the grandstands, the roar of the crowd rising, tens of thousands on their feet. The thunder of hooves and the excited cries of spectators blended into a wild music that threatened to sweep everything away. But in that chaos, Elliot found a strange sense of calm, a sense that everything that needed to be done had already been done. Now, all that was left was to let Shadow fly. At the starting gate, the tension was suffocating. Shadow snorted, the muscles in his neck trembling. Elliot locked eyes with him. "Let's show them who we are." The bell rang. The gates burst open. In a split second, 20 horses leapt forward, legs churning, dirt flying. For a moment, Shadow hesitated, just a flicker of old fear, the weight of every scar and every doubt. Elliot's heart lurched. But then, with a sudden, wild defiance, Shadow surged forward. The limp was there, unmistakable, but it didn't slow him. He ran like he always had, awkward, imperfect, but with a spirit that made the crowd gasp. Elliot, running alongside the rail, called out encouragement as the field thundered into the first turn. Shadow stayed near the back, fighting for space. The favorites, sleek, beautiful colts with pedigrees worth millions, pulled ahead. Commentators muttered, "Looks like the underdog's already out of it." But Marisol's voice was in his mind. "Trust him, trust yourself." Elliot didn't yell, didn't panic. He focused on the connection he and Shadow had built, the silent language of trust. Halfway through, something changed. Shadow, finding a gap, pushed ahead, ears pinned, eyes blazing. Elliot caught a glimpse of the crowd's disbelief. A hush fell as the little black colt began overtaking horse after horse, his limp a badge, not a weakness. At the final turn, Shadow was third. Elliot's heart pounded, tears threatening to spill. "Come on, boy. One more time." The leading horse stumbled, the inside lane opened, and in that moment Shadow surged. The roar of the crowd rose to a fever pitch. Elliot ran with him in spirit. Every ounce of hope and heartbreak poured into that last stretch. Shadow thundered down the home stretch, his limp pronounced now, every stride a testament to pain and persistence. The finish line was chaos. Hooves flashing, cameras clicking. With a final burst, Shadow crossed first, a nose ahead of the favorite. For a split second, the world went utterly still. Then, pandemonium. The crowd erupted, disbelief turning to celebration, underdog lovers shouting their approval. Reporters jostled, cameras flashing. Marisol whooped and threw her hat in the air. Marcus and June screamed themselves hoarse, clutching each other in shock and joy. Elliot pushed through the mob, reaching Shadow, just as the colt's knees trembled. The limp was back, worse now, but Shadow stood tall, sides heaving, eyes bright and wild. In the stall afterward, away from the chaos, Elliot pressed his forehead to Shadow's. "You gave me your all. Now I give you mine. No more races unless you want them. You saved this family, Shadow. You saved me." Dr. Kim arrived, concern etching her features as she checked Shadow's leg. "He's sore, but he'll recover. He's got more heart than any horse I've seen in years. Just take it slow." Elliot nodded, emotion choking his words. No more pushing him for anyone's approval. He's earned his rest. The press flooded the barn, demanding interviews, offering money, begging for the story. Elliot gave a single statement. We didn't win because we were the fastest or the prettiest. We won because we believed in each other when nobody else did. Back at Highgate Ranch, news of the victory swept through the community. Old friends and former doubters brought casseroles and pie, some sheepish in their congratulations, others genuinely overjoyed. Richard arrived, pulling Elliot into a rare embrace. "You did it, El. You proved us all wrong." But for Elliot, the real victory came at home. That night he cooked dinner with June and Marcus, laughter returning to their table. They watched the replay on TV, screaming and cheering as Shadow crossed the finish line again and again. The farm didn't feel like a burden anymore. It felt like home. Later, as dusk fell, Elliot walked out to the paddock. Shadow limped over, accepting a carrot with gentle dignity. The sky was wide and clear, the stars just beginning to appear. Elliot stroked the colt's scarred neck, grateful for every second chance that had brought them here. "Thank you," he whispered, "for teaching me that victory isn't about being perfect. It's about showing up, scars and all, and running your heart out." The night air was filled with the quiet strength of belonging. Elliot realized, finally, that whatever tomorrow brought, more races, more struggles, or just the simple, sacred peace of family, they would face it together. The world might remember the headlines and the drama, but Elliot would always remember this feeling. The freedom that comes from choosing heart over expectation, and the quiet, unshakable trust between a man and his horse. Word of Shadow's unlikely Derby victory echoed far beyond Highgate Ranch. Reporters called from as far away as New York and California, all wanting the inside scoop on the miracle colt and his stubborn, sentimental owner. Racing syndicates offered blank checks for a share of Shadow's future. Invitations poured in for interviews, parades, and television specials. For the first time since his father died, Elliot saw the ranch's mailbox fill with congratulations, not bills. But beneath the celebrations, another deadline approached, one that would test not only Shadow's heart, but Elliot's. The Belmont Stakes loomed, the final jewel in racing's triple crown. To the racing world, this was the true test. Only legends crossed that finish line, and almost none with a limp. The pressure was relentless. The bank called, hinting that a win at Belmont could save the ranch forever. Sponsors hovered, eager to cash in on Shadow's underdog story. Even Richard seemed hopeful now, calling to urge Elliot on. "You're one win away from turning this all around, El. You could put Highgate back on the map forever." But Elliot's mind churned with worry. Shadow's limp, though managed, hadn't vanished. Dr. Kim was blunt after a checkup. "He's a fighter, Elliot. He could run. He wants to. But you know what's at stake. There's risk in pushing him again. Maybe this is the time to let him rest. Go out a hero." Elliot sat awake in the dark. Marisol at his side in the kitchen, both of them exhausted but unable to sleep. Marisol sipped coffee, her voice steady and true. "If you run him like a machine, I walk. You're not that man, Elliot. This horse saved you. Don't let ambition ruin him." Elliot nodded, but he didn't answer. The temptation was enormous. One more race, One last shot at immortality and security. The community's hopes, his family's future, even his own stubborn pride seemed to ride on Shadow's back. Yet, when he looked at the old colt standing quietly in his stall, all he saw was the trust in Shadow's eyes. The trust they'd built through scars and silence. In the days leading up to the Belmont, Elliot's anxiety grew. The ranch hummed with activity, calls, visitors, last-minute preparations. Marcus and June sensed the tension. Marcus, usually reserved, came to his father late one night, voice barely above a whisper. "You don't have to prove anything, Dad. Not to anyone. We're proud of you. And Shadow." June, clutching the old stuffed animal her mother gave her, sat by Shadow's stall, humming softly as she braided a ribbon into his mane. "You don't have to win," she told the colt. "We just want you to come home." Elliot spent the night before the Belmont in the barn, a blanket thrown over his shoulders, the radio softly playing country music from the corner. He watched Shadow sleep, the colt's breath slow and steady. When dawn broke, pale and gold through the barn window, Elliot knelt by Shadow's head. "One last time, if you want it," he whispered, tears filling his eyes. "I won't make you run if you're done. I'd rather lose everything than lose you." Shadow nickered softly, as if answering. Elliot took it as the sign he needed. The morning of the Belmont was charged with expectation. The track was alive with the glitter of high society, the hum of TV cameras, and the relentless shouts of betting men. The crowd was larger than anything Elliot had seen. Tens of thousands, many there just to see if the underdog could really do it again. As Elliot led Shadow into the paddock, Marisol joined him, hand on his arm. "No matter what happens, I'm proud of you both. Don't forget, he's more than a horse. He's your family." Richard met them at the stables, for once leaving criticism at the door. "This is yours, El. Whatever happens, I'm behind you." The kids hugged Shadow's neck, June whispering secrets, Marcus patting the colt's shoulder with trembling hands. "Come back to us," he said. As the horses lined up at the starting gate, the tension was electric. The favorite, a blue blood with a spotless record, pawed at the ground impatiently. Eyes narrowed at Shadow. Elliot stroked the colt's mane, heart pounding. "Let's just run for us, okay? Win or lose, you're already my champion." The bell rang, the gates crashed open, and the Belmont roared to life. Shadow broke cleanly, his limp barely noticeable, the months of careful training paying off. Elliot's world narrowed to the rhythm of hooves and the taste of dust in his mouth. For the first stretch, they stayed in the pack, running steady and sure. At the first turn, Elliot heard the crowd gasp as Shadow nudged ahead, ears flat, heart pounding. The favorite surged, and for a moment it seemed Shadow would fade. But Elliot felt the old defiance, the spirit that had carried them through darkness, the stubborn refusal to let go. He gave a gentle squeeze with his legs, a soft word. Shadow responded, pushing through pain, running not for glory, but for the connection they'd forged. The final stretch approached, the finish line a blur in the heat. The crowd's roar reached a crescendo, voices shouting, "Come on, Shadow! Come on, Graves!" Elliot felt tears streaking his face, the weight of every hardship and hope pressing against his chest. With a burst of strength that defied every expectation, Shadow surged to the front. The favorite gave chase, but the little black colt, Highgate's Miracle, pulled away, stretching for the wire. 5 lengths ahead, he crossed the finish line, triumphant and free. Elliot pulled him up gently, slowing to a walk, tears streaming down his face. The world exploded in cheers and confetti, cameras capturing the moment for history. Marisol sprinted to the track, throwing her arms around both man and horse, weeping with joy. Reporters swarmed, questions flying. "How did you do it? How did a horse like Shadow win it all?" Elliot just smiled, wiping his face, his voice clear and steady. "He believed when nobody else did. We finished together. Back at the stables, Dr. Kim checked Shadow's leg. He's tired, but he's okay. You took care of him, Elliot. He's earned his rest, and so have you." The family gathered in the quiet, tears and laughter mixing in the golden afternoon. Even Richard cried, hugging Elliot tightly. Dad would be proud. Mom, too. That night, they returned to Highgate Ranch. No parades, no reporters, just the peace of home. Shadow roamed his pasture, scars shining in the moonlight, head held high. Elliot sat on the porch with Marcus and June, their hands entwined, hearts full. We didn't win because we were perfect, Elliot said softly, but because we finished together. In that moment, surrounded by the people and places he loved, Elliot knew they had already won the only race that mattered. Morning came quietly to Highgate Ranch. Golden light pooling on the frost-speckled grass, the world softer and gentler than it had seemed in months. The day after the Belmont Stakes, after all the cheers had faded and the cameras were gone, Elliot stood at the kitchen sink with his hands cradling a mug of coffee, staring out at the pasture. Shadow grazed near the far fence, head bowed, tail flicking in the breeze. There was a peace in that image, a kind of contentment Elliot hadn't believed possible for years. The phone kept ringing, of course. Network producers wanting interviews, racing magazines offering front-page spreads, companies pitching endorsements. Elliot listened politely, thanked them, and turned each down. There was nothing any of them could offer that meant more than what he had already won. Highgate itself felt changed. Neighbors stopped by, some with fresh-baked bread, others just to shake Elliot's hand or pat Shadow's neck. Even the bank manager, Miss Price, arrived in her Sunday best, her voice warm as she confirmed, "Your winnings clear the debt, Mr. Graves. Highgate is yours, free and clear. I hope you'll teach my kids to ride someday." Elliot smiled, feeling an unfamiliar lightness. "You just bring them by. Shadow's got plenty left to teach." The ranch bustled with small, good things. June and Marcus helping with chores, laughter echoing through the barn as they joked and played, Marilol staying late most evenings, her relationship with the family deepening beyond trainer or friend. The wounds that once seemed too deep to heal had begun to close, stitched with love, forgiveness, and a second chance they'd all fought for. For Elliot, the legacy of the ranch became something bigger than bloodlines or trophies. He wanted his children to remember the lessons they'd lived, the way trust could mend broken places, the strength that grew from scars. One crisp afternoon, Elliot gathered his family near the paddock fence. Shadow trotted over, as regal as any champion, scarred leg held proud, head high. June ran to hug the colt's neck, her giggles bright in the autumn air. Marcus scratched his ears, murmuring, "You're the real legend, buddy." Elliot looked at his children and Marisol, his family, whole in a way they hadn't been since Sarah passed. "Do you know why this ranch matters?" he asked, voice gentle. "It's not just about land or winning races. It's about who we are when the world tells us we can't. It's about believing, quietly, stubbornly, every single day." June beamed, "Like you believed in Shadow." Elliot nodded, tears in his eyes, "And like you believed in me, even when I didn't believe in myself." They watched as Shadow galloped across the pasture, his movement powerful, beautiful despite the limp. He ran not from pain, but from pure joy, the way only the free and forgiven can. Each stride was a testament, a living, moving memory of every struggle, every lesson learned. Time at Highgate Ranch shifted into something precious, measured not in paychecks or headlines, but in the slow, meaningful rituals of family. June's dancing returned, brighter than ever, with Elliot always in the front row, cheering louder than anyone. Marcus, having found his footing again, started helping other kids in the community with sports and school. His kindness, the gift his father had almost lost, now rediscovered. Marisol became a part of their daily lives, staying on not just as a trainer, but as a mentor, confidant, and slowly, something more. She and Elliot shared late-night talks under the stars, conversations about loss, healing, and the possibilities of new love. It was gradual, gentle, the way spring follows winter, not erasing what came before, but honoring it. On the anniversary of the Belmont, the community gathered at Highgate Ranch. The crowd was smaller than any racetrack, but meant more to Elliot than any sea of strangers. They celebrated Shadow's journey, yes, but mostly they celebrated the hope his story had rekindled in them all. A young boy, awkward and shy, approached Elliot as the sun set. "Do you think a horse like Shadow could teach me to ride?" he asked, hope trembling in his voice. Elliot smiled, kneeling so their eyes met. "I think Shadow could teach you just about anything you're brave enough to learn." As the party faded and the stars blinked on, Elliot and his children walked out to the pasture one last time. Shadow grazed nearby, but when Elliot whistled, the colt lifted his head and trotted over, eager and alive. Elliot scratched behind his ears, voice barely more than a whisper. "We didn't win because we were perfect. We won because we believed. Before anyone else did." Marcus nodded, voice steady. "Because you showed us how." The night was quiet, filled with the soft music of crickets and the gentle wind moving through the grass. The ranch, once so full of sorrow and uncertainty, was alive with the certainty of second chances, of scars turned to stories, of a legacy not measured by what was won or lost, but by the love and belief left behind. Later, sitting by the fire pit, Elliot gazed at his family, laughter rising as flames danced in the dark. He understood now what his father had meant when he said real strength was built in silence, in scars, in second chances. That belief wasn't loud or flashy. It was the quiet, steady light that kept them moving forward. Shadow, the little colt nobody wanted, was more than a champion. He was the proof that the best race isn't the one you win, but the one you finish together. As the fire faded and the children drifted off to bed, Elliot lingered in the hush of night, grateful. He whispered into the stars, thanks for the pain, the joy, and the impossible journey, for the ranch, for his family, for Shadow, and for the lesson that would outlast every race, every hardship, every headline. Sometimes, the heart that keeps going, no matter the scars, is the only legacy worth leaving behind. Real strength is built in silence, in scars, in second chances. Belief isn't loud, it's quiet and constant. Sometimes the best race isn't the one you win, but the one you finish together. Like this, if you've ever been counted out. Share it if you know trust can rebuild anything. Subscribe for more stories where heart outruns doubt,